What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Midwestern Marks podcast. It's been a while since we've done one of these. My name's Eddie Smith here with my co-host Carlos Garrido. How's it going, Carlos?
I'm doing good, comrade. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. We haven't done one of these in a while, but we were banned on TikTok recently, um, which is a blessing and a curse. TikToks they were draining on me to do for sure. And just being on that app all the time, it's kind of toxic. So now I'm kind of excited to do more of these to talk about news and theory, and the stuff that we love to talk about the most and that we think is the most important. So we're gonna kick things off by talking about Colombia. I'm not super up to date on the situation right now, but Carlos has been following it fairly closely. So, what's going on in Colombia, Carlos?
Well, first off, I've been following very cursory. It's just been an over-the-top look, but it's important to note that Colombia has traditionally been a stronghold of U.S. imperialism. With, for instance, with the attacks that U.S. imperialism had on Cuba during the beginning of the pandemic, where they were withholding the shipments that came from the Jack Ma Foundation in China. The place where they withheld it were like Colombian airports. So Colombia has always been a stronghold for U.S. imperialism in the region, and uh, nonetheless, they've always had like a fairly strong guerrilla movement known as the M19. I don't know the history too well, but some years ago they dissolve as a sort of guerrilla and start becoming political. And what you have now in Colombia is a candidate, Gustavo Petro, who was one of the members of the M19 group. And he just won something known as the Historic Pact, which is, from what I've seen, basically a primary for the left wing forces. He got more than 80% of the vote, and he's put himself in a really strong position to potentially become president of Colombia. So I think that this would be a crushing and more so demoralizing defeat for American imperialism, which has had such a secure station in the region through Colombia. And it signals, I think, both the advancement of this red/pink wave that's taking place in Latin America. We saw uh, uh, the inauguration of Gabriel Boric in Chile a couple of days ago, or yesterday, I think, and he saluted Salvador Allende. And I know that the viewers are probably know the fact that he expresses some views that are not too radical, and his perspective on places like Cuba and the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution are not the same ones we share, but nonetheless is a progressive force in the region, and I think that overall it's a positive. So we have a similar dynamic now with Petro in Colombia. We also had in Honduras the victory of Xiomara Castro. So the region is having a pink/red wave. And I think overall that signals a general trend that seems to be taking place in geopolitics, which is the move away from unipolarity, from the US being the sole power in the world that just dictates its will on everyone else, towards multipolarity. And whether it's the East, the Arab world, or the global South, what we find is that U.S. is being uh, challenged and often defeated, more than before at least.
Definitely. I mean, if there was, a left wing, even social democratic candidate to be elected in Colombia after, we had a democratic socialist elected in Honduras, like two countries in Central and Latin America who are known for being bastions of the right wing, the extreme right, propped up and backed by the U.S. State Department in the arms of imperialism. So that would be incredible. But as you said, it's a pink wave, so I'm still, I guess, is skeptical because of those things that you said, because some of these elected candidates like Gabriel Boric have been hesitant to denounce the countries who the U.S. has taken imperialistic actions against, like Cuba, countries who we believe are trying to build socialism. But whoops, I made a mistake there. I meant to say that we've still been critical of these elected candidates who do denounce countries like Cuba, who are hesitant to support these countries. Yeah, I messed up there. We filmed this podcast after I got done with wrestling practice, and I was really tired. I'm sorry. Nevertheless, it's a step in the right direction. Uh, and yeah, it's definitely another blow to the U.S., which is happening more and more and more lately. And we'll see what kind of consequences this loss or this end of U.S. hegemony is going to have here at home too here soon.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we have to understand as Marxists, that the struggle for socialism is going to take different forms in different places because it's just different conditions, not just in the direct context we find each country in, but historical conditions which have shaped those contexts. And in Colombia, if you're walking around, praising Cuba and Venezuela, it makes it a little harder to get elected. So I don't doubt that some of the rhetoric that we've seen that has been slightly hostile to these countries is more so tactical in order to get elected. I don't think that at heart someone who was a part of M19 really holds such bourgeois liberal democratic views about Cuba and Venezuela, especially since M19 had certain connections to Cuba. A lot of their militants trained in Cuba, which was a general trend in Latin America for these focal groups. Focalism is it's like the guerrilla strategy that Che Guevara developed. So I find it very difficult to have someone who was a part of those groups now have those views. So I'm inclined to think that it's just him being smart, knowing the context that he's in, and doing and adjusting his discourse to the place he's in so that he can win. At the end of the day, what matters is them coming to power and becoming an anti-imperialist force, and that would force them necessarily to ally with countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, and the rest of the pink/red wave that exists in Latin America.
And we can judge them by their actions, right? Like we we can we hear their words and we can guess what they're gonna do, but we can judge them by do they end up aiding the US in imperialism like social democratic countries do in Europe, or will they like you said, trade and ally with Bolivia and Venezuela and Cuba and fight or argue against the embargo or vote against the embargo at the UN if it comes to that. We can judge each country by their actions. Yeah.
If we judge them by the words, the U.S. would be the beacon of liberty and freedom, and democracy and shit.
They are.
So yeah. Bourgeois freedom, liberty, and democracy, right?
Yes.
So we wanted to also switch to the topic of censorship, which, as I'm sure the audience knows, there has been widespread censorship in the U.S. RT America was basically banned. A lot of great shows that were from left-wing and socialist creators such as Abby Martin, Chris Hedges, Lee Camp, they've all just been canceled because of this censorship. So we've also felt this in the flesh, basically, with our project with the TikTok, which was the biggest avenue which we had at close to 400,000 followers, and you were running that, Eddie. So how do you see the context of censorship, both as it relates to the censorship of the TikTok and as it relates to the general trend that is taking place now as the Cold War is heating up?
Yeah. I mean, we always kind of predicted this, which is why we have tried so hard to build up our other socials. I mean, our other social media accounts and then our YouTube here. So we can try and maintain, our audience or retain our audience here once this happened, because we were getting to a large following, and it's like the U.S. ruling class is not going to allow this for long, is what I was thinking to myself, I guess, and what Carlos and I were talking about. And we were right. And we thought, it was going to be during the SOS Cuba protests, which, it was proven now that the US State Department was collaborating with a company in Miami to put out social media bot accounts to flood comment sections with SOS Cuba propaganda, regime change propaganda. And then the account got banned, but we eventually got it back. There was a big call for us to get it back. And then recently, with the Russia-Ukraine situation going on, the account has been taken down again. And as Carla said, there's been a wave of censorship, and outlets much, much bigger than ours, like RT, have been censored. And I don't know. There's just so much hypocrisy. It's so interesting. People who like are MSNBC commentators or people who go on CNN all the time are talking about how Abby Martin can't be trusted, or Max Blumenthal, or whoever else. Not to say these people always get it right or we always agree with them, but whoever else can't be trusted because they go on RT. It's like, well, these people get blackballed from, the American corporate media because they're critical of the US State Department. So it's like, well, what media is more biased? Is it RT, which allows these people to have a voice, these people who sometimes are critical of Russia? Or is it MSNBC and CNN, who blackball anybody who's critical of the American empire, because these private news institutions are owned by oligarchs, of course. So it's interesting to see. And now you have it on social media. You have the creation of the metaverse, which is basically just, the monopolization of social media, which is just going to make censorship easier. And we're going to have to find alternative methods to spread theory and propaganda and stuff. But it is definitely concerning. And it's funny because, the main, like, played out argument against socialism is like George Orwell's 1984. You're going to live in this authoritarian society where Big Brother is watching you. And it's like, well, in capitalism, Mark Zuckerberg is watching you. He is Big Brother. We're living in 1984 almost. So, and it's interesting, even conservative people I know are mad about it because they're like, freedom of speech should apply to these news corporations, or, to social media corporations. Because, they're so big, it's basically like the public square now, that they should be regulated as public utilities is the argument. And I think that's a good argument. That's what we should do under socialism.
Well, one of the what people don't often know, one of the first things that Marx was writing about as a journalist was against censorship. Was against censorship because he was getting censored left and right in the newspapers he was writing for. One of the points that you make is really good. The fact that there was a plurality of opinions in RT. Sure, it's funded by the Russian state, but when you look at the content of RT, you have so many different people with so many different backgrounds talking, and even with the right now with the conflict in Ukraine, the intervention, the Russian intervention in Ukraine, you had people like I'm forgetting his name, but the guy that runs the show Going Underground. He was critical of Russia's intervention. He was calling it an invasion. So was Abby Martin. She was someone that was critical of Russia's action, although she, of course, contextualizes it better than anyone in mainstream U.S. media does. She was critical. So you had people with, even in such a large issue, you had a plurality of views. And what you have in mainstream U.S. media is not that. You have complete uniformity when it comes to the things that truly count, right? I remember one of the first things that you wrote that I read was your thesis when you graduated from undergrad, and you did a study of what mainstream media was putting out there with relationship to Venezuela, and it was just complete uniformity. And you showed very well how there was no opposition to the narrative on Venezuela. And that's the case with everything, right? That's the case with everything. And when opposition does show up, people get kicked off of their networks, right? So it's funny because they just kidnap words. They kidnap words like liberty, They kidnap words like freedom of speech, and they just kidnap truth. It's whatever they say, it's was truth, and it's very scary at a time when social media plays, and just media in general plays such a big role in people's lives, to just completely annihilate any dissenting content. I mean, pages that are not that big, like this Mango Press page I've seen float around in Twitter, they got banned for just sharing stuff about Ukraine and some of the atrocities of the Azov battalion, and some of the things that the military people are doing over there with the people that are trying to leave the country. So it's very scary. And I had one of the comrades who runs another project. He tagged me and a group of other people on Facebook on a post about the potential for, general progressive socialist and communist forces coming together and creating some sort of social media platform that won't get censored as easily. But it's not it's not usually that easy. I wish it was, but you have countries. This is something we touched on in a podcast a few months ago with Ramiro. Like, did Nicaragua have like their own social media apparatuses so that they can block off some of the propaganda, or just allow the freedom of an alternative narrative to emerge? And it's difficult for a country to do it. I can only imagine how difficult it would be for a group of people within the country that censors the most to do it. So it's a really scary time. And I think that one of the things that we've always focused on in our project is the fact that nothing can replace organizing in your workplace. Nothing can replace organizing in your community. And at the end of the day, that's something that they can't really censor as easily. This online interaction is fantastic, but it's always at the whim of capital. And whenever it becomes too dangerous for capital, the rug is going to get pulled out from under. So we have to be conscious of that and always try to plant our roots in our communities and in our workplaces.
Absolutely. That's where our focus should be. Our focus should never be online, because like you said, this is a nice tool for education and reaching people, but it's just that, it cannot replace workplace and community organizing. And that's interesting. You were talking about how countries like Nicaragua have set up their own social media sites so people can get around like American hegemony. And people always say like the Great Firewall in China is like the most authoritarian thing ever, but it's mostly to protect Chinese citizens from not getting their data stolen, and not allowing these giant Western corporations, even though some of them are allowed in China on some level, to like steal the data of Chinese citizens and censor them and do all these things that they do in the West, which is interesting. And the US actually did a similar thing with TikTok. When we were sort of blowing up, there was this big controversy where Donald Trump was saying he was going to ban it. And, eventually laws or rules were put in place that said TikTok needed to be managed by American corporations or whatever. And that's when we stopped like making money substantially, and then eventually led to getting permanently banned. So it's interesting. You sort of have this battle also between the two poles, the imperialistic US versus China, also battling in like I don't even know what you would call it technologically, with trying to protect data security.
It's a new field of struggle. And I know that, I mean, on one end, we do have to realize that nothing replaces live interactions with people, right? Nothing can replace workshop organizing, community organizing. But on the other end, it's a very serious field of interaction where public discourse takes place. And that's why I think it is fair to be on there and to be concerned about what are some of the discourses. I know that there's a lot of like shit posting and bots and stuff like that. But it is a public sphere of influence, and a lot of people change their views on things and act and do different things. I mean, there's a video circulating now of an American who went out to Ukraine. Those are actions that are influenced in part by the things that people see on social media, right? So it is a sphere that has tremendous influence. So regardless of the fact that you can't replace it for in-person organizing, it's still a field of battle, right? It's almost like we're having a discussion, I think in a podcast episode that we did a year or two ago, and we're talking about religion and how in countries where religion is widespread, the struggle for socialism in the level of the superstructure and the cultural level means the struggle of a religion that's progressive and in the interest of the working class against the established religion, right? So the same thing, the same problem, I think it's here with social media and technology, that it has through through its material development made itself into a field of struggle, and we shouldn't undermine it, and we shouldn't overestimate it either, right? We need to have a concrete understanding of it and realize that it's not enough, but it's also not going to be enough if we don't use it, right?
For sure. It's a good way of putting it.
And I
All
think
right,
it's China, the one that has the Twitter. Nicaragua hasn't been able to like develop the alternative yet, if I recall correctly, and it's difficult, right? It's difficult to build up these great systems that allow people to interact in the ways that they do. Um, it's gonna have to, I think, get done because we're seeing it. Like there was this one page, this military page, I think, that was posting both sides of the conflict now in Ukraine, and they just got banned. It's just any information that goes against the official narrative just gets banned, and that's scary. But we should also realize that a normative critique, although it might be effective, needs to be premised by an understanding that this is how capital works. We should expect this like this. So the other thing we wanted to talk about, the way that we've always kind of broken down these podcasts, has been where the first half is usually something with relation to contemporary politics, and the second half is usually theoretical. But as we know, things are never as clearly cut as we might think that they are. That things always bleed into one another. The political discourse is always imbued with certain theoretical content, and the theoretical content is always imbued with certain political implications. And I think that the topic that I want to touch on today, lightly, is the Soviet manuals. So during the Soviet Union, there was these manuals that were produced by the main institutes that were basically Marxism textbooks. They're usually divided into three major sections: political economy, philosophy, and socialism, which is the same sort of breakdown that Engels's Anti-Düring has. It starts with philosophy and it goes into political economy and then socialism. And these manuals, they've been largely criticized by Marxism in the West as being sometimes reductive, sometimes mechanistic, sometimes simplistic. And they've gotten the content in these manuals and or in other similar texts that try to do similar things, like Stalin's Dialectical and Historical Materialism, that try to provide the basic ideas of Marxism to a mass audience in a way that's understandable and that refrains from some of the academic jargon. They take these texts and then they homogenize it. So they say that, look, there's this thing called Soviet Marxism, and everything that you find in Soviet Marxism, or in the Marxism that comes out of the Soviet Union, is like this. This is simplistic, this is mechanistic, and in part, these theoretical failures show failures in politics and economics and blah, 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 blah. And so Western Marxism has really built up an industry. Again, the word Western Marxism lightly, I'm using it lightly, but the Marxism that has taken root in the West as a reaction to the Marxism that existed in the Soviet Union and the Marxism that was prevalent in communist parties, they have really developed themselves on the basis of criticizing Soviet Marxism or official Marxism or official Marxism-Leninism, and just taking these textbooks and trying to tear them apart. There was a time when they actually were engaging with the textbooks. Now it's like so formal that there's no new book that you'll buy on Marxism that won't repeat some of the dogmas that the old Western Marxists would say about Soviet Marxism as if it was just like common knowledge, right? In philosophy, I think good philosophy, and this is something that Gramsci, you mentioned hegemony, this is something that Gramsci agrees with. The first thing is know thyself. And to do that, you need to know what are those things that you don't know that you know, right? What are the things you don't know that you know? Because those are your assumptions. Those are the assumptions you're taking into the work that you're doing. And I mean, I've been engaging with a lot of recent literature of the last two years, basically, of Marxism, the recent stuff that's been printed, and almost all of them have the same redundant critiques of Soviet Marxism, being this, being that, simplistic. They take dialectics and they make it into a metaphysical view and blah, 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 blah. What you never find is a citation to any of the manuals. You never find that. You find here and there citations to Stalin's dialectical and historical materialism, but it's conceived as that's how everyone thought. It doesn't matter that the Soviet Union was one of the largest countries, or at least Soviet Russia was one of the largest countries on the planet. Every single human individual that considered themselves a Marxist thought like that. That's their idea. It's pretty absurd. But what you find, and what I have found in my research of so-called Soviet Marxism, is that there has been a plurality of opinions. And even if you read like Stalin's texts, a lot of his texts are polemics against other people. And I'm sorry, but in order to have a polemic against someone else, you need someone else with a different fucking opinion. I'm sorry, it's just basic common sense. If you have just one opinion, you can't have a polemic because you need more than one in order to discuss. So yes, there was limitations, and limitations were unhelpful, and they prevented progress in certain areas. But there was a plurality of views that are worth exploring. There wasn't just one form of Marxism. If you look at even the manuals that these people criticize, the manuals coming out around the time of Stalin's 1938 dialectical and historical materialism, they analyze dialectics completely different than Stalin. Stalin leaves out the negation of the negation. And that's a big mistake, in my opinion. That's a big mistake, and it had political implications, right? The negation of the negation is the principle that Marx appeals to at the end of Capital when he's talking about the expropriators being expropriated. The nail of private property sounds, boom, the negation of the negation, right? So it was used as the dialectical law which interpreted revolutions. So Stalin removed it. That's wrong. But the manuals from the time didn't remove it. They contained the negation of the negation, and they had a bunch of other categories that they interpreted dialectically. And what I have found, both reading Stalin's work and reading the manuals and reading the other tendencies that were a little bit richer from the Soviet Union, is not just that there was a plurality of thought, but that it's really foolish to take your object of critique to be these Soviet manuals. Because these are textbooks. These are textbooks that are meant to inform regular cadre party members and just regular students, right? I have family members who have educated themselves in Cuba, who were not Marxist specialists, who were not specialists in Hegel, but who had to read the manuals in order to graduate. It's like the basic general credits that you have to get in the US to graduate, where you have to take a bunch of dumb stuff. They had to do that with the manuals. And today I'm able to talk to these relatives about Hegel, dialectics, and some of the more dense topics of the theoretical aspect of Marxism with no problem, because they studied the manuals, because they set a really good foundation for these people. And yes, in some places it is simplistic. Yes, in some places it is mechanistic. But the process of learning is a dialectical process. You have to learn things at a basic, almost not incorrect, but at a basic level in order to then expand on it and have your knowledge be more and more concrete. And these textbooks did a fantastic job at teaching people what dialectics is, what are the basic principles of dialectics, what's the Marxist theory of history, what's the Marxist conception of what socialism as a negation of capitalism is. They did a really good job at that. And that reflects itself in the fact that a lot of the professionals that trained with those books, even if they weren't specialists in philosophy or anything like that, they retain the knowledge. So now we have a situation where I think in the West, it's becoming a little bit okay to talk about the Marxism of the Soviet Union again. The most famous Marxist journal that comes out of the UK, Capital and Class, in their recent issue, they had an article about Soviet Marxism that was quite good. One of the recent books that I've reviewed, Khan Kangal's Frederick Engels and the Dialectics of Nature, it goes a lot into Soviet Marxism, and that was published by Palgrave. So modern publications are engaging with it again. But a lot of the times in the engagement, you get the same dogma without realizing these are textbooks that you're giving to people who are not specialists and who are learning. And that then, after you let them read the Konstantinov manuals, then you can give them Ilyenkov, which is harder. I mean, I tried to, the philosopher Evolt Ilyenkov, I tried to read him before I read Hegel. I did not understand it. And I had studied Marx at that point. I had to go through like a year of reading intensively Hegel in order to then go back to Ilyenkov and understand what the hell he's talking about. Is this the Marxism you want to give to people? Or do you want to give them something that they understand and then can build upon? So I'm sorry, that was a longer rant than I expected, but that's been my research for the last few months, interacting with these different ways of explaining the basic principles of Marxism and specifically dialectics.
This is good though. I mean, I thought the Soviet manuals might be a dry topic, but you made it very interesting. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you got to start people at a baseline level, and if you compare that to like what you're taught in the West, in liberal countries, like, oh, it was George Washington, and everything that happened in America at this time was because of him and a few other rich guys at the time. You're not taught about different class forces and historical materialism, and even being taught those things on a rudimentary level is better than being taught like this great man of history fallacy that we learn in the West. I'm just thinking like in the field of history, like even getting a basic understanding of historical materialism, like they teach World War I in the US usually, at least I was taught, like, there was someone who got assassinated, and because countries had alliances, they all got pulled into a giant war. It's like, no, they were imperialist countries fighting over the colonies, imperialist countries run by their capitalists, as capitalism was developing at that time. And even having a rudimentary understanding of that and the different class forces at play at that time, and is way better than not. So and I haven't dug into the manuals, but that's just what I thought after hearing hearing your awesome rant about it.
That's another good point that you paint, which is that if you compare it to American education, I mean, come on. Sure, if you compare it to like the most advanced like developments of Marxism, like I'm currently, my research is currently focused on doing a comparative analysis of the 3 volumes of Capital with both Hegel's Science of Logic and the Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences, which is a little bit of a dense topic, right? It requires a lot of reading. But if you compare what is being taught in the manuals to like a cursory to the sort of basic level introductory classes and textbooks that you get in the US, it's a hell of a lot richer, right? You provide a good explanation, like World War I is taught like bad guy kills another guy, boom, World War. That's, that's horrific, right? That's an abomination to scholarship. And so is some of the things that are being done in the West. If you criticize something and you cannot cite the book, that's not scholarly behavior. If you're going to criticize something, cite the literature so that you can critique, especially this is something we get from the dialectical tradition. To get beyond something, you have to go through it. You can't just skip yourself around it. You can't ignore Lenin or the Soviet manuals, drop 2 or 3 sentences critiquing it, and then, I overcame Soviet Marxism, or I defeated it. No, that's stupid. You have to use the literature, and if you genuinely disagree with it, show me why you disagree with it. Show me what they say and how you disagree with it, or why it's wrong, right? But they don't do that. They don't do that, and it's very funny and hypocritical, as is most things from the empire. They're the ones that claim that the Marxism from over there is mechanistic, and that the Marxism from over there is undialectical, and blah 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 blah. But they're the ones that embody all of those things that they point over there and say, oh, that's what they are. It's the same thing with the empire. The empire says they're undemocratic, There's no liberty over there. There's no freedom, blah, blah, blah. But that's what we are, right? And the little bit of that they have, it's because of the pressures that we input on them. So, yeah. So
Yeah, and I like the point that you make. We always make this point of like understanding that there's a debate in other countries too. Just because Stalin said something does not mean, that he was that was the accepted opinion by everybody at the time. And there's a tendency in the Western left to do that so much, and people do it with China, like you're a Dengist or you're a Maoist, people call us Dengoids or Dengists all the time. It's like, no, we like Mao and Deng, but we understand what they did was different. The period they were living in were different. And there was a debate constantly. And Deng was around in the government or in the party debating and arguing for his ideas when Mao was in power. And people never want to look at that. They just think it's this one. I read Stalin's Dialectical and Historical Materialism is what everyone in the Soviet Union thought. Like that was not the case.
the Soviet Union was publishing 60% of the books in the world. Out of every 5 books published in the world, 3 of them came from the Soviet Union. And you're going to tell me that after reading the 38 fucking page Dialectical and Historical Materialism, which is one chapter of one book, now you know everything about Soviet Marxism and you can criticize it and dismiss it? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it shows beyond just a lack of theoretical honesty, it shows a little bit of chauvinism. It shows a little bit of chauvinism, because to believe that the people in the East all think the same way, that's rooted in certain prejudices. And those have to be challenged. I think philosophy starts, as Gramsci says, by know thyself, reflect on your own prejudices. And that's the process of critique of ideology, which a lot of them do a really good job explaining on how to do it, but none of them do it themselves, for themselves.
Interesting. Yeah. You got anything else to say on that topic?
On that topic, no. I wanted to inform the listeners of some of the things that we have coming up. We're establishing ourselves as a formal press. We had printed last year our first Journal of American Socialist Studies, which is, I don't know, in my opinion, pretty sweet. It's got really good scholarship on American socialism, which is an underexplored topic, not just for socialism in general, but for socialists in America. There is a long and rich tradition of socialism in the US that has been anti-racist, abolitionist, anti-sexist, and that has fought for the rights of workers. And when you strip a movement of its history, as bourgeois education has done, you're destroying it, right? The movements are based, and communities are really made communities when they're able to collectively reflect on a past. And if we're unable to collectively reflect on a past that shows the socialist struggle in the US, we're unable to build an effective movement. So what we're trying to do with this journal is provide an interdisciplinary study of the traditions of struggle in our country. And we did that with the first journal, it's going to be made available for free pretty soon. And we're hoping to do that with the second journal in a much more vast manner. But we're also getting on other printing projects. And again, if you want to support our efforts, please check out our Patreon. You can donate just $1 a month. If you can. If you can't, then please don't. Just like share our videos and stuff, which is free. But it's a very important task, because look, capitalism is driving the world to shit. And we are at the heart of the empire. We're at the heart of the country whose capitalists are guiding the train of history towards a wall, right? Towards a precipice. And we need to do something about that. And in order to do something about that, we need to know that other people have done it in the past, that some of the things that we enjoy the most in the US, that workers enjoy the most, have been things that have been struggled for, not things that were given to us by the American capitalists. And that, that we had a working class that was internationalist at one point, that understood that their interest was with the workers of the rest of the world. So we need to recapture that history. That's what we try to do in the journal. And I think it's utterly important for the struggle for socialism today in the US, and thereby in general for the rest of the world. If the US empire falls, socialism can peacefully develop in the rest of the world.
Absolutely. That was a great way to end it, I think. Beautiful little speech there. And I couldn't agree with you more. Super pumped to put out some more print journals. We were really proud of the last one for all the reasons that Carlos said. So yeah, excited to do more of those. So thank you all for your support, especially with, our TikTok being banned. If you're still sticking with us, supporting us, we really appreciate it. And we are excited to put out more educational and sometimes entertaining content for you here on the Midwestern Marks YouTube. All right. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you later. Adios.